Brilliant. Oh, well, firstly, it's really lovely to see some of you from the Approaching a Monologue webinar. Everyone just give me a wave. Anyway, faces old and new. Brilliant. So this time I'm going to be building upon what we did there, but looking specifically at Shakespeare. Focusing on his work and giving you another kind of toolbox of techniques to unlock clues in Shakespeare's writing. Now, I just want to say at the start, don't be scared. I think it's really natural to feel intimidated. If you don't, great, keep on down that track. But I mean, this is somebody that was writing in the 1500s and 1600s when language was very different and nobody understands it all. You know, even great Shakespearean actors today will be looking up words, looking up different editions. On first reading, they won't understand it all. So please, never when you come to Shakespeare feel intimidated or scared if you don't get it first time, or if you don't get all the like intricacies of the text. That's normal. That's absolutely normal, especially when you see books like this. You know, it's natural to feel intimidated. I mean, the weight of it is huge. Well, I was really lucky to do King Lear at the National Theatre when I came out of drama school, directed by the amazing Sam Mendes, and there were 18 actors in the principal company, and then we had a company of 32, I think it was 50 in all, supernumeraries that played soldiers, but we were all in the rehearsal room all the time, and those 18 actors all had a different approach to Shakespeare, a bit like I was talking about in the Monologues webinar. Every actor will have their own unique approach to a text, to a work, and that's great, because that's what makes you you, and that's what gives you your own interpretation. So I'm just going to give you some tools today, different ways into Shakespeare to get you thinking, so that it doesn't feel like an intellectual exercise, or that you have to speak it in a certain way, or that feel there's a correct way. I think sometimes people feel there's a right way to do Shakespeare, and there really isn't. Shakespeare uses different structures, poetry, verse, and it's a choice as an actor and as a director how you approach them. So I think the first thing to remember is that Shakespeare wrote plays with characters. And like any writer today, plays are meant to be performed. He wrote characters that were, you know, interesting, contradictory, messy, almost like putting real people on stage. And so that all of those characters have wants and needs and fears and hopes and dreams. So I think the best way into Shakespeare to start off with is to think about it as a story. So look at the whole story of the play, like any story in theatre or on television, and look at the characters. Put yourself in their shoes and think about what drives them. And I would say just equip yourself with all the knowledge you can, a bit like when I talked about in the Monologues webinar, finding out as much information as you can. You know, read the play, and the Arden editions are really good because they put a lot of notes down by the sides of it, so they often explain some more tricky words. But equally online, there's Spark Notes, there's Cliff Notes, there's lots of things. Use all of these tools to help you get the idea of the bigger picture. And also, I would say I love film adaptations of Shakespeare, and the BBC did a series called Shakespeare Retold. And all of these ways are just ways in to understand the story and the bigger picture of the play that you're going to be working on. And just make sure that that story is clear in your mind. And then the second step would be to look at the words Shakespeare uses. So just as a little exercise now with me, I would like you to think of one of your favorite songs. Now, it has to have lyrics, but it could be any genre. So it could be pop or rap or hip hop. Just have a song in mind now. And I want you to think about the lyrics of the song. So, and if you were to write them out, or sometimes in albums, you get the, when you used to get like physical albums, you get the lyrics written out. I want you to think about how the artist structures the lyrics on a page. Think about the structure of them. There are verses, there are choruses, there are bridge sections, and think about the rhythm. So think about the use of rhyme, repetition, and, you know, the flow of the words. Now, I've asked you to do that because Shakespeare works in a really similar way, as does any poet or playwright. You know, he wrote words and he used words for a reason. And he wrote in both prose and in verse. And all that means is prose is written or spoken language in an ordinary form without a metrical structure. And verse is writing with an arranged metrical rhythm. So a bit like that song that you're thinking about, that has a natural rhythm and cadence to how it flows. And as an actor, it's your job to translate these words on a page into life, to give it a human shape and form, to give it a body to live in. So as an actor, we're always looking for clues. And Shakespeare's verse, where he's structured his words, is filled with clues. And like I said in the Approaching a Monologue webinar, these clues are there. They're in the writing, they're written in a certain way, but it's your job to interpret them. And that might mean that you want to obey the rules, that you want to follow that structure, but it also might mean that you want to break it. You want to break the rules. You want to ignore it or use it in your own way. And equally, that's fine. But I'm going to talk about verse now, and just so that you have an understanding of that structure and some of the clues that Shakespeare puts into his writing. So when Shakespeare writes in verse, he writes in iambic pentameter. That's his blank verse form. And all that means is basically iambic means a leg, and pentameter means 5 to a meter. So basically it's 5 legs of verse. And all that is a soft beat followed by a hard beat. So we can take the line in Macbeth that says, "So foul and fair a day I have not seen." And that rhythm is almost like a heartbeat. So you can beat it out now with me. It's "So foul and fair a day I have not seen." So, but obviously you don't see actors performing it like that on stage. It's just the underlying driving rhythm. So 10 beats, unstressed, stressed. And we might want to question why Shakespeare wrote in this rhythm. Well, number one, it's easy to remember. If you think about the actors in Shakespearean times, they were doing 7 or 8 plays in rep with each other, so they had to have 7 or 8 plays in their head. Texts had to be copied by hand. There were no printers or photocopiers. And a bit like a song on the radio, with its structure, it's actually easier to learn. It goes in better. So that could have been one reason. The other reason for this rhythm is that it's a very natural and dynamic rhythm. It's a bit like a train or a horse. It's got that kind of energy to it. And all this meter is the baseline for the meaning. And really, it's a form of verse that most naturally follows the pattern of human speech. So if you just spoke that line out loud, not even knowing about iambic pentameter or verse, "So foul and fair a day I have not seen," it naturally follows that rhythm. So I would just say, don't overthink that. Have that at the back of your head as the form that Shakespeare uses, but don't feel like you have to hit every bit, because that isn't natural. And at the end of the day, we're playing characters and we want to get that meaning across. So if a good example of this is, you can take the opening to Romeo and Juliet. 2 households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona where we lay our scene, from ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. So you can hear that heartbeat. You can hear the rhythm of the meter without me stressing it or beating it. But so when you come to a text and a monologue in particular, you might want to follow that exercise where you kind of beat out the heartbeat of it. But equally, you might just want to speak it out loud. You know, find a space, find a room, and just speak it, because as soon as you put it in your mouth, that rhythm will come through, and you can really feel that beat driving it. And that's just how Shakespeare wrote. But one thing I'm going to say to you is, when do you notice your own heartbeat? Well, the answer is normally when it changes or when it stops. You know, we go around our daily lives and we're not consciously thinking of our heart beating, but when it speeds up with exercise or when it skips or stops, that's when you notice it. And Shakespeare plays with his verse so much throughout his work, and I think naturally if you just read it aloud, you'll be able to hear it. But I'm going to point out some specific things now that you can think about specifically related to character and building a character. So if we take Hamlet as our first example, the famous line, "To be or not to be, that is the question." Well, there's something weird about that, and basically it's got 11 syllables, and so do the next lines in the soliloquy. And Shakespeare could have written, "The question is to be or not to be," and that would have followed that natural kind of 10-beat line, but he didn't. He wrote it with 11 syllables. He wrote it with that soft ending. And I think when I read that, it's almost like Hamlet's thoughts can't be contained, you know, that they're spilling out of the verse. And Shakespeare often uses an 11-syllable line when characters are in turmoil or going through something. So you've got Juliet, who says, "Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo?" where she's questioning, you know, why he had to have that name. You've got Macbeth, "Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow." And it's almost like at these moments when characters are experiencing uncertainty or questioning, Shakespeare kind of gives them an extra syllable. It almost points to their state of mind. So that's always a really interesting thing to note when you come to a piece of text that you might be performing, or you might just be kind of reading for pleasure. That those bits where Shakespeare breaks the pattern or changes the rhythm is actually kind of often reflective of a character's state being irregular. And another technique he uses in his verse is the use of rhyme. And I also believe that's a choice. You know, if you think of that song that you thought of at the beginning, the use of rhyme is very specific in a song. So you could take the last lines of Romeo and Juliet. "For never was a story of more woe than this of Juliet and her Romeo." So that play ends with a rhyming couplet. And Shakespeare uses rhyming couplets in lots of different examples. There it's kind of rounding off the play because, you know, in Shakespearean times they didn't have any lights or curtains, so it could be argued that he's doing that through sound. But often you see the use of rhyme when friends or lovers are talking to each other. They often talk in rhyming couplets, and that gives the verse, and that gives it a shape and a symmetry and a speed. So you often see that characters are in sync because they're mirroring each other, and it's just a great way for to get into that rhythm and that rhyme as an actor, and to almost feel that energy between you. So I think Shakespeare's verse and how he uses those patterns really gives you a clue when you're playing opposite somebody, as to the speed of the delivery and the character relationships. Along with rhythm and rhyme, we can also look at how Shakespeare uses sound and speed with the words he chooses. So often he uses monosyllables and polysyllables. Again, please don't get overwhelmed by those words. Polysyllables just means a word's got lots of different bits to it. Monosyllables means that it's singular, it's got single syllables. So in Othello, he uses lots of monosyllables, and what they do is it really slow the line down, so the words have a weight. So Othello says, "It is the cause, it is the cause, my soul. Put out the light, and then put out the light." Now, they're both taken from Act 5, and that's a really significant time for Othello in the play because he's about to kill his wife. But the use of those single syllable words really slow the verse down, and I think really gives the actor playing Othello that space and that weight to explore that mindset. Because really, if you're in that state where you're about to kill your wife, you need that time, or you need, I think Shakespeare's giving that time to explore. And again, you can see it in King Lear, when Cordelia dies, King Lear comes out and he says, "Howl, howl, howl, oh, you are men of stones." And those ohs really slow the line down. I mean, you could speed it up. That would be a choice as an actor. But I think within the writing, within that pattern that Shakespeare's written, I think he's naturally leading you as an actor to explore the words and to give them a weight. So you can't really help but slow down and acknowledge the words. So often this is characters processing kind of huge emotional life events. And as actors, I think our job is to constantly question why playwrights choose certain words, a bit like why an artist chooses certain lyrics. And along with these different kind of patterns, Shakespeare also uses space and silence. So that's another way in. Times when he chooses not to have the words, a bit like the heartbeat stopping. So in Macbeth, when Satan comes in, the servant comes in, he says, "The queen, my lord, is dead." So that's 6 syllables. So at the end of that line, there's a spare 4 syllables. And I think most of the directors that I've worked with would allow that space. Again, it's a director or an actor's decision whether to honour that. But that gap really allows the space for the news of the Queen's death to land, to hit Macbeth. And it would be called a broken line, which is a bit like a broken state of mind. And equally, along with spaces and silences, Shakespeare also uses elision. Again, don't get overwhelmed by the word. It just means the process of joining together or merging things. So that's when a character's thought runs on beyond those 10 beats. So Hamlet says, "Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them." So that thought goes over 4 lines. So you can see that his thoughts are almost pouring out. And that's a great parallel with approaching a monologue, when I was talking about mapping out the structure of a character's thought, where the playwright puts the full stops. I think it's a real insight into how a character speaks. So you can use that rhythm and the thought process to really kind of unlock a character and how they speak and how they think. And another way Shakespeare uses and structures verse is to put irregular stresses. Again, you would just hear these naturally, reading it out loud, walking around. So you can see that in the opening to Romeo and Juliet. I'll use that example again. It says, "Two households, both alike in dignity." Now, rather than the ba-bum, 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 Shakespeare's inverted that. So the stress actually comes on the two. So right in, opening of the play, two households. So it goes bum-ba. And you would hear that just to read that out loud. And that's really dramatic. It really kind of grabs an audience's attention, but it also provides key details for the audience. So 2 households, 2 families, 2 central characters, Romeo and Juliet. So I think all the time when you're looking at these clues, you can see how, well, they're just clues, or they're just tools that weighs in to see what Shakespeare's doing. And you have to remember that his audience were mainly listening to the play. It was very oral culture, and the groundlings at the Globe, if you ever get a chance to go to the Globe, please do. It is the most amazing experience. And be a groundling, stand at the front of the stage and let the actors spit on you. You know, it's a really special experience, and it really gives you a sense of almost what theatre was like in Shakespeare's day. So those people would have been used to kind of hearing a play. So, and you have to remember, they didn't have kind of fancy lights or curtains like we do now. It really would be Shakespeare playing with language and playing with patterns of speech. That would be a lot of how he worked on his audience. So so those irregular stresses, I think, are put in for a reason. And we can see it again in King Lear. Lear's got a line that says, never, 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 never. So Shakespeare's using inversions. That's a whole line of bombard, bombard, bombard. And that really creates like a jarring effect, because if you as an audience were used to hearing that natural pattern, like a piece of music, that never would stand out as an unnatural part. It would be very jarring. It wouldn't be in harmony. And at that point in the play, I don't think it's any coincidence that Lear's, you know, questioning the disjointed nature of the world. You know, Cordelia's just died, and like that piece of music, it's almost like his state of mind's not in harmony. And that also uses repetition. Again, another tool to look at how Shakespeare chooses words. He had the most incredible vocabulary. We owe so many of our words in modern speech to Shakespeare. And so I always look at repetitions in Shakespeare and think, why? Why, when he had these amazing kind of like piles of words to choose from, why did he choose to repeat the same one? And for me as an actor, that would be linked to, if I was playing King Lear, I would think that's linked to my state of mind, and I would enjoy the repetition, and I would really use it to inform my character, because I do think, you know, all of these words have been chosen carefully, and so I would speak out loud as much as possible, and really really like enjoy the sounds of that, and look at what they did to me, and how those words kind of affected my body, affected the other characters on stage. So repetition is another kind of language technique or tool you can look at. Another one is juxtaposition. Again, a big word, don't be alarmed. It's just two contrasting things that Shakespeare puts together. So Helena and Hermia in Midsummer Night's Dream, Hermia says, the more I hate, the more he follows me. And Helena says, the more I love, the more he hateth me. So it's just using that opposition to show that the relationship, that these characters are not in harmony. So again, another tool, repetition. And the way Shakespeare also places a lot of energy on the verbs. So you remember this exercise from the Monologues webinar as well, that he rarely puts emphasis on the pronouns. So I, you know, in today's society, I think everyone often stresses I or you. Shakespeare, you look at his writing, you speak his writing, and more often than not, the emphasis is on the verb, and that's the action, and that really kind of drives the action and gives it kind of a dynamic flow. So those are just some things to look at in Shakespeare's verse. So rhythm, rhyme, sounds and speed, spaces and silences, lines running on, irregular stresses, juxtapositions, pronouns and verbs. But again, I'm pointing these things out, but you would naturally come across these just if you read it out loud. It would be a natural gut reaction as an actor, or just as anybody reading Shakespeare's text out loud. So those are just things to have a look at in verse. But Shakespeare also writes in prose without that structure, and you can often see this on a page where it's just a block of text, and often he uses it as a character choice. So the mechanicals in Midsummer Night's Dream, they speak in prose entirely, whereas lots of other characters speak in verse, you know, Helena and Hermia and the regal court there. The fairies are different. I'll come on to them in a minute. But again, when you come to that page in the play, it's a bit like, oh, it's jarring. You think this is different, and really Shakespeare's showing those different worlds. And you've got Benedict in Much Ado About Nothing. He almost speaks entirely in prose, as opposed to the characters around him. So I think if I was an actor in that role, I'd really use that and think, actually, this is what makes me different, and really kind of enjoy that difference. And And so I just think it's really important to always question why. When you come across these things, don't ignore them. Just think, oh, why has Shakespeare done that? Why is that there? Why is that rhythm changed? And he also gives characters different rhythms as well. So you can see the witches in Macbeth, or Puck in A Midsummer Night's Dream, the fairies. Puck, if you take Puck's lines, if we shadows have offended, think that this and all is mended. Those lines are only 8 syllables, not 10. And it's almost like Shakespeare's given his fairies their own language, which is kind of, I think, really exciting. And if I was playing a fairy, I think that'd be something just to dive into and celebrate. So those are kind of the differences between verse and prose. And really, they're just things to notice. And I think they are things that you would naturally do if you were to just read Shakespeare aloud. But I think they're really good to have in your toolkit, just to be aware of, and just especially if you're approaching a Shakespeare play as an actor, because if you've got those things in your head, then when you come to read it, or when you come to speak it out loud, you can think, oh, that's that technique. And you don't have to have all the fancy terms for them. You can just think Shakespeare's gone against the rhythm there, that or that jarred. I wonder what that says about the character's state of mind. And again, it's all open to interpretation, and it's all your decision as an actor as to whether you want to obey that structure that's been written, or whether you want to go against it. I always think Mark Rylance is an incredible he's an incredible Shakespeare performer, but whenever I've been to see him, he breaks the rules all the time, which is just so exciting. And I don't think he does it in the same, well, he's a brilliant actor for never doing it in the same way every night, but I think it's always interesting to me how much he decides to kind of go against the established techniques and anything in Shakespeare. I think that's what makes it exciting. So I would say when you're approaching Shakespeare, do it your way, use those clues, use those tools, but enjoy making your own decisions. So to summarise, and in a practical way for approaching a Shakespeare play, I'd say, number one, establish the story and the character. So do your reading, watch film adaptations, TV adaptations, look at the character you're playing, think about them if they were in the modern world, think about what's happened to them, think about their relationships, speak the play out loud as much as possible, because Shakespeare wrote these plays to be performed. And then you can look at how he uses words and plays with that structure: rhythm, rhyme, sound, speed of words, spaces and silences, lines running on, inverted stresses, repetitions, use of verse and prose. There's so much there that you can play with and explore as an actor that will inform your character decisions. And if you're playing a character, use all of those tools to help you build a picture of who this character is. And then you can go on to those questions that you would ask when you approach any monologue, as a character question: who, what, when, why. Write down the facts, ask questions, walk it, sing it, dancing, do whatever you would normally do to build a character, but use what the playwright's given you as a guide. And I firmly believe that, what Shakespeare's given us is a guide, but I think he would want you to be your own actor and make your own decisions. So I know I've thrown a lot at you again. Please fire any questions back at me, and I hope that roller coaster of tools and words and techniques and verse structure has done something to kind of break down that idea of Shakespeare being something that's heavy or intimidating, and actually giving you an idea that it could be exciting, and there can be tools for you to explore as an actor building a character.
How old were you when you first did Shakespeare, Cassie?
Oh, when I first did Shakespeare, I think it might have been at College Street when I was doing junior youth theatre. I think it was them. I remember doing Midsummer Night's Dream, but I think before that, my mum actually took me to see a production of Midsummer Night's Dream at Ludlow Castle. We had some friends that lived near there, and I thought it was just like, even now I look back, it was one of the most magical things ever. It was just as the sun was going down. I think it was about 7 o'clock, yeah, so theatre time at night, but I remember all the fairies coming out in these kind of, they had gold glitter on them and they came out with lanterns, and it was amazing. And for me, I was just so kind of intrigued by the story, and it really felt magical. So I think that was almost one of the best introductions to Shakespeare, because I knew that I didn't understand all the words, but I understood all the story. And I think that's what a great production does, and what great actors do. You know, they convey the meaning and the relationships and the story and the characters. And even as an audience, if you don't get or understand every kind of nuance of verse, it doesn't matter, because the stories themselves are so full and so rich and full of kind of love and death and betrayal. I think if you plot how much action is in a Shakespeare play, it's insane. You know, it's an epic roller coaster of a drama.
Yeah. Do you have a Shakespeare part that you've never played that you'd really love to play?
I've got two. Yeah. When I was kind of looking and preparing this, was reminded I would love to play Puck one day, and I just think it's such a mischievous character. I think Puck would be a lot of fun. But my ultimate is I would love to play Lady Macbeth. I think I've had a few directors tell me I'm not old enough yet, but I think she could be played at any age. And for me, I think she's a really difficult character, because if you look at what she's actually got to do in the play on stage, a lot of her part happens off stage, you know, and she has to come in at these really dramatic moments and deliver and be there for that. But a lot of your character work as an actor, I think, happens off stage, so you have to do a lot of work to bring that on with you. And I think all the productions or interpretations that I've seen haven't quite captured my sympathy. And I think she's always portrayed as this kind of, she's always portrayed as evil, and I obviously she does horrific things, but I don't think you can ever approach, if you're playing a character, you can never judge your character. That was an amazing lesson from drama school, because as a person, you don't judge your own actions to be evil or motivated from a dark place unless you're psychologically ill. Every person believes that their actions are justified, or they have a rationale in their head about why they do something. And for me, I would really love to play her, because I'd really love people to have an empathy with her and to be on her team. And I think that would be a great challenge that I'd love to approach.
Harry, do you have any particular practical exercises which help with learning the Shakespearean language and build confidence?
So I think speak it out loud as much as you can, almost from the moment that you pick up the play, because that will point out all of those tools and those the times when Shakespeare plays with the verse. And a bit like a song, that rhythm and the structuring will really helps it go in. So I think I'm more so than modern plays that I've done, I go to speaking it out loud, kind of almost from first read if I approach a monologue. And also kind of the heartbeat exercise also helps, because I kind of walk around beating out the verse, to remind myself of that structure, and also to look at where the stresses are. And I think for me, that separates the thinking part of my brain with the feeling part of my brain. That's not a medical, a medical separation that I think any doctor's listening would go mad. But for me, I think it takes it out of that intellectual looking at words on a page and actually puts it in my body. And by beating out the meter of the verse and the rhythm of the verse, it really helps me think about the key words and whether I want to emphasize them or not, and also kind of think about that character's state of mind. If they've got an 11 syllable line that runs on, then then what does that do to me in my body? What does that make me want to do with the line, with the words? So yeah, practically, I think speaking it out loud, moving around with it, and beating out that rhythm.
A question from Jessie. What was difficult about being in King Lear? Did you all do yoga in rehearsals?
I don't think Sam did lead us in yoga. He was very practical. I don't know whether Sam is a yoga fan. He's probably not averse to it, but it was incredible. Like, it was my first job out of drama school, and I went for the audition, and I don't think I ever thought that there was a job at the end of it. I think I just thought, oh, it was really nice that they were seeing new graduates for the part, and so I think I just went and I did my speech, and I did the best job I could, and then they rang, I think it was the same day, and said I started rehearsals in 2 weeks. And so for me, I was just, what was difficult, I think just coming to terms with the fact that was almost a career goal for me. That was going to be my ultimate goal was performing at the National, and that it happened within 2 months of leaving drama school, and almost like the challenge and the amazing opportunity that came with that. But in rehearsals, I don't think we didn't do yoga. We spent the first 2 weeks around the table. So and I think Sam only did this because it was Shakespeare, but it was looking at the verse structure, almost using some of those tools. So saying, oh, it's interesting that this character has an 11 syllable line here, and almost talking in as a company about why that would be, or and also looking at the different editions of Shakespeare, and how editions differed of King Lear, and what our edition was going to be. And Ben Power, who was the dramaturg on that, was amazing to be there. So that was the first 2 weeks, and then after that it was almost like this. I remember this magical Monday happened, and we were in one of the rehearsal rooms, I think rehearsal room 1 at the National, which is the same size as the Olivier stage and has a revolve in the rehearsal room. And I walked in, and there were all these Persian carpets everywhere, which I think is quite a Sam rehearsal technique. And we all sat around the outside of this circle, and on these carpets and kind of soft poofs and cushions. And then the scenes we had, I think it was 2 weeks of Persian carpets, and that was getting it on its feet, and everybody trying out scenes for the first time, but with no set and with no restraints or walls, or just looking at what one line did to another character, and those relationships, and building those relationships. And then from then we moved on to kind of mapping out the set and how it was going to work in practical terms, and then we went onto the stage. So it was like that process of building, so starting with the text and then moving outwards. But it was a phenomenal first job, and taught me so much, because I realized that 18 different actors have 18 different approaches, not only to Shakespeare but to character in general. And to learn that at such kind of a young part of my career, I think was an amazing gift, because it really kind of empowered me to think, okay, well, this is what my interpretation of Cordelia, of the nurse, is. So here we go.
Here again. What was it like working with Simon Russell Beale?
Oh, incredible. He's a friend now, and I think this is what's wonderful about being an actor, is that I think in any other job you very much end up with work friends that are the same age as you, but as an actor you're in a company and you're in it together, and so I've got friends in their 80s, or Simon's not in his 80s, but I think that's wonderful. And he could not have been more generous or more supportive or encouraging of me. The whole company was, because they found out it was my first job, and they really took me under their wing and kind of showed me all the nooks and crannies and the secrets of the National. And Simon is one of the most generous people you could ever meet. And I remember at one point we had to cut we had to cut some lines, and he was concerned that somebody had enough to say in the play, and that's from you know, a leader of a company that if anyone else was playing that part, they might not have even been aware of that in the rehearsal room, because they were probably focused on their own lines. He is just wonderful, and when he got his knighthood, I remember saying that he'd always been a knight to me. He's amazing.
And then, do you learn all the words before going into the rehearsal room?
Not normally, because I'm normally familiar with them, but it depends how long you've got. I remember doing a two-hander play written by Barney Norris, and we only had 3 weeks rehearsal, and the director asked us to learn the play before we got into the rehearsal room. But normally that kind of 8 weeks of rehearsal is your golden time for exploring the character, and not learning it per se until you've explored every opportunity and really stretched out the possibilities of how you could play it, or how you could say a line, or and sometimes I think when you learn things, you can learn them in a certain pattern, or in a rhythm that can then be hard to unlearn. So it really, I think it's director led. If a director wants you to learn a part before you get into the rehearsal room, they'll normally say, but more often than not, you'll go in being familiar with it and having all the ideas about character that you want to bring, but then it's very much a collaboration with the director and the other members of the company. And one thing I did want to say as well is that I think Shakespeare sounds amazing in a Nottingham accent. So I think you should all really celebrate your accent when it comes to Shakespeare, because I think sometimes, I know that when I went to drama school, I was almost scared to explore the full range of my voice, and as Midlanders, we have the most amazing sound and and I think that, coupled with Shakespeare, something magical happens. So if you're ever doing Shakespeare, do it with a Nottingham accent, and you might want to record one for lockdown monologues. You can absolutely do a Shakespeare, and really, I just want to encourage you to use that full Notts accent, because it sounds amazing.